Okay. All right. I think I'm recording. Hi, guys. Our last official theory session. Oh, well, you know that today officially is religious culture, but because, wait, can everyone hear me? I'm guessing yes, but just let me know if you have any issues. Yeah, let me just wait. You can hear me, yeah? Because I've had some technical issues with the previous one. Yep, everything okay. Brilliant, good to see. Thank you for confirming that. Last week, it was a ridiculously long PowerPoint, and we had time to see like, what, about, I would say half maybe? We did, okay, so it was supposed to be social services as well, and we didn't see enough social services. So my plan would be today to review social services, and then to do a little bit, or as much as possible at least, of religion. But I was just talking to one of the students in the classroom, Lucas, and he was saying that in the case of religion, I mean, a lot of it we've already seen. We've discussed the Puritans. You've already seen religion in depth for the first term with British religion. I mean, of course, it's the same characteristics, but there are certain peculiarities in terms of the history of the US that I think we just need to keep in mind to see, for example, religion and education in the US. That's something that I think is quite important to look at because it's quite a controversial topic. We have actually discussed the fact that I don't think religion has ever appeared in any of these before. Or has it been asked about? I know that you've got your summaries. Religion hasn't been asked previously, but again, we can't base studying or not studying on what's happened before because you never know. I mean, they might suddenly decide to bring something that hasn't been focused on in previous years. So at least today we can discuss, and if you have any doubts, then just let me know. Okay, so remember first of all dates. I want to make sure that I tell you. So today, obviously, is our last review of the book theory. Then you have your first possible exam week would be next week, and I'm going to be invigilating, so I'm not going to physically be here. But the following week, I will. So if anyone wants to come or whatever, or follow it online, I will be recording here, not next week, but the week after. And my plan is, because by then we'll already have the exam from the previous week, we can have a look and we can focus on some of the other topics that haven't been asked about, for example. Okay? So we have 2 sessions left. Oh, okay, let's do this, guys. So I have summarized social services because obviously we need to get through 2 in 1 today. So social services history. Just stop me if you have any doubts. We know, originally during colonial times, we said that the US was based on what? On agriculture. Farming, it was, this is important, the word scattered, right? Scattered basically means that there were lots of different groups of people, and they were based in different areas, okay? So how would you say that in Spanish? I'm trying to think. It's like repartidos, esparcido, sí, exactly. It's like lots of people in different areas. So obviously each group would create its own way of doing things. There were few large urban centres, and generally the society was based on agriculture. So until the 1930s, there were no widespread public services for the population. The large majority had to rely on itself, basically, on private support, providing their own social, health, employment, and housing needs, so they wouldn't rely on the government. Okay. So what happened in the late 18th and 19th centuries? We've said this many, many times, industrialization. Remember this process of industrialization and urbanization? Because what happened? This brought wealth to some, especially big factory owners and people who were at the very top of the hierarchy. However, many, many people got even poorer because they lost their jobs. So what happened? At the time, social assistance was still largely private and individualistic, but people needed help. They needed support because they didn't have any help and people were dying and there were many epidemics, people were getting very sick. Politicians at the time avoided intervention and government spending on social health. It's like los pobres que se apañan. That's what we were saying last week, you know. Consequently, what happened? Because if people didn't complain, and if people were like, they're Americans, do you remember what we said about this individualistic culture? It's like, you need to look after yourself, cada uno. Therefore, no adequate national system of public social services was developed in the late 19th and early 20th century. It was all, again, every community or every family looks after themselves. If you're rich, buena suerte. If you're not, not so much. So we can see here the existing system of self-reliance, remember this term as well, self-reliance, so to rely on yourself, could not cope with the economic collapse with the Great Depression. We spoke about the crack of engineering, you know, the Great Depression was dirty. So this was something that the fact that there was no system in place that would support the poor people meant that many, many people died and they had no one to help them. Oh, sorry, you can't see the pictures. Okay. The resources of private, public and voluntary organisations proved insufficient in the 1930s, when an estimated 40%, that's massive, imagine, 40% of the population lived in relative poverty. So we're talking a huge amount of people who had no support from the government and they were essentially left to die. I mean, it's like that, they were just left to their own devices. So, what happened in the mid-1930s? Os acordaréis de Roosevelt and his New Deal. He wanted to help people. He wanted to put systems of social protection in place. Sobre todo, he focused a lot on labour standards, on helping workers. He was like, if people are workers, then they need some kind of insurance in place or something that's going to help them. They need, you can see, a minimum wage. They need restricted working hours. Eso que decíamos la semana pasada, working, basically like, you know, the idea of this deadline-based working. It's like, you need to finish this essay, and until you finish this essay, then you're not going home, right? He came, and because he was pro the workers, he said, no, people need working hours, people need a balance between work and life. Some people agreed with him, and some people not so much. The rich, exactly. So later we have President Johnson. He introduced programs also trying to combat poverty, trying to help society. Especially Johnson, actually, some of his reforms and his war on poverty specifically. So the war on poverty means that government is going to support the poor. So his idea of supporting some of the poorest levels of society formed a basis for future public and social services. So a lot of the current social service structures took President Johnson as a starting point. Okay. Spending on public social services increased in the 70s and 80s. There was a move away from military expenditure. What I've tried to do here is I've tried to break down these different time points and these different presidents. And as we spoke about last week, depending on whether you're conservative or whether you're more social-minded, of course that's going to affect whether you are pro the government giving handouts and helping the people, or whether you prefer the rich to become richer. Okay? So for example, President Reagan, he wanted Americans to what? To be responsible for their own lives. Este era de, exactly, of self-help. This is Reagan. However, the cost of social security and welfare solutions to the federal budget did increase. He had people telling him, you can't just leave people to die. It's the 80s and the 90s, it's the modern era. What happened with Bush? You can imagine. This is Bush Senior. Reduced public spending. However, he was forced to meet increased demand by tax rises. So he also wanted to bring down public spending. Clinton tried to introduce, this is interesting, because you know we think about Obama as being the first one to try and, well at least I normally think of Obama as Obamacare. He's the one that's trying to bring in universal healthcare. Ya lo intentó Clinton. The Clinton administration, 93 to 2001, tried to introduce universal healthcare in 93, so it's 93, how long ago? 93. 24 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a 93, like, oh my God. Wow. Yeah, so in 93, he already tried to introduce universal healthcare financed by both individual and corporate contributions. What does this mean? Super, super rich people, they call it the 1%. The individuals who are really, really rich, and the corporate contributions, people, Google, people, these massive investors, the corporations that we spoke about, if they can contribute at least a percentage of their huge earnings, we might be able to do this. But what happened? Ya sabemos. This reform collapsed due to opposition from the public, and especially certain members of the public, and businesses. Olvídate, right? So we can see that there's always this kind of, we call it a to and fro. It's like we have this complex situation where some people are in favour and some people are against, depending on their own interests, of course. What happened with Obama? This is an interesting one. The Obama administration, right up until 2019. Exactly. So there was opposition when he passed what's known as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. If you look up PPACA online, you look up PPACA controversy, you can find forums of people fighting, pro-PPACA, anti. There was a lot of opposition. The act was intended to extend health insurance coverage to some 50 million uninsured Americans by 2014. He wanted to help those people who couldn't access insurance. Because, of course, I was talking to an American friend. I have a friend from Texas. And I said, I'm very confused. Can you explain healthcare and what it's like and what happened with Obama? And she was like, basically, depending on if you're working for a really important company and if you're making lots and lots of money, then you're covered. You have no problem because you get insurance through your job. Mm-hmm. But the issue is that people who don't have high-level jobs, people who basically are on the lower end of the scale, they have no insurance, and therefore, if they fall over and they have a problem, they have to pay. And they have to pay huge amounts of money. She was talking about this friend who wasn't doing very well, and she broke her leg, and she had to pay, I think it's like thousands. I mean, it's just an astronomical figure. And then, I mean, we think about in the UK and Spain, it's almost like something to take for granted. We just go like, we don't think about how lucky we are. You know, uy, las colas en el hospital, and then you think like, podría ser peor. But anyway, so you have to pay a lot of money if you're not insured, obviously. So what Obama wanted to do specifically was to help what? He wanted to help the elderly, he wanted to help minorities, he wanted to help marginalized groups of society to have access to healthcare and to become insured. In March 2018, the CBO reported that the ACA, this thing, the Affordable Care Act, well, they said ACA or PPACA. This ACA had reduced income inequality in 2014, saying that the law led to the lowest and second quintile, blah, 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 to receive an average of an additional, what does this mean? Look. 2018. It caused households in the top 1%. So if you're super, super rich, when we're talking about top 1%, it's like multi-billionaires. So according to Obama's proposal, the top 1% had to pay an additional $21,000 yearly due to net investment income tax and additional Medicare tax. So what are we saying with this? We're saying that what Obama was trying to do, you know Robin Hood, it was like that, literally. He was like taking from the rich, give it to them. And of course, when we talk about the huge opposition that he faced, especially was from that 1%, because you know, I have 21,000 when I can buy a new Lamborghini or, bueno, Lamborghini, no, a Mini, una moto. Pues, so that was the problem. Now, I've based this summary on the previous book that only reaches until Obama. Do we know what's happened with Trump? Do we know what Trump wants to do? Yes, Alan.
Yeah, conservative again.
Exactly. So Trump, one of the first things that he said to come into power, like as in to try and get the votes of the rich, he was like, Obamacare, I'm literally going to, he could scrap it. He used the word scrap. It's like, a la basura, Obamacare. He said, what did he want to do? He says that there are other ways that the American healthcare system can be regulated and that people can pay less money without necessarily having to tax the 1%. So, for example, what he talks about is drugs. He says that there are these monopolies with the people who provide pills to the hospitals. So it's like, if you go to these companies and you enforce regulations on drug companies, then that will bring down the price of drugs. He also says, let's help the younger people. Now, he's not necessarily about minorities and about, he says, I think that people, sorry about that. He says, I think that people who are younger, or people who don't have, for example, if you have diabetes, or if you have some kind of like health issue that's ongoing, he says that you should be forced to pay more than someone who's young and healthy and fresh and no problem. Chronic, thank you, exactly. He talks about chronic illnesses. So he says people with chronic illnesses, que paguen. Mayores, gente a punto de morir, que paguen. Empresas de drogas, que paguen. So that's kind of his way of doing things. It's a different sort of system. And then he says, then it's not so necessary, que paguen los 1%, right? So that's Trump, but anyway, so just a rough idea of healthcare. Now, we're going to look at the organisation of contemporary social services. Currently, Americans rely on the public sector. There are federal and state programs. For example, a lot of my American students, they have government-funded scholarships. So they, because of brilliant academic progress or whatever, the government will support students, etc. Like Obama. Yeah, exactly. Now, they also rely on private funds, insurance-based services paid for by individuals or workplace groups. What does this mean? As I said, if someone works for Google or someone works for Yahoo or some really big corporation, obviously les interesa pescar a los most formados, the most inteligentes, so they offer these amazing insurance schemes. They say, si venís a trabajar para nosotros, free healthcare, te cubrimos todo, no problem, tranquilos. So the private sector will fund their workers' insurance policies, etc., because it's in their interest, right? There are also, as we know, voluntary bodies that support both in terms of healthcare, the homeless. Do you remember we spoke about, this is something that's actually really quite interesting. It's like at the core of American society is volunteering. When I talk to my American students, a lot of them tell me, over the summer I volunteered teaching at a school. They'll go for 3 months and they'll go and they'll support 5-year-old children. I mean, it's not necessarily completely out of the good of their own heart because they then put it on their curriculum and then it helps them to achieve better jobs in the long run. But at the same time, you can tell that they enjoy it and it's really part of the culture, you know? It's like help others and then you can help yourself at the same time. So, yeah, voluntary sector, especially lots of religious institutions we're going to see later on, the church. The church also receives a lot from their followers. Anyway, so basically public, private, and charity, volunteering. Let's look at public social services. The social security system is administered from Washington, so we have the central administration. It covers old age, people with disability, Medicare, etc., etc. The needy and the poverty line, who helps the people who are really super, super, super poor. Federal legislation since the 1960s has provided financial help, work, training, rehabilitation for needy and poor, resources to house and feed the homeless, and healthcare for the sick. I speak to some American friends and they say, this is what they say. If you're homeless in the US, es porque again, it depends on what side, you know, whether you're pro one politician or another, etc. But there are systems in place to support the needy, the impoverished. Healthcare, we've discussed, but hospitals and clinics are largely operated as private businesses, okay? Although some are community and volunteer run, especially, for example, drug addiction clinics, There are some where people, they've been previous drug addicts and then they go and they help, etc. Some are owned by local government, not necessarily by the central government. Remember, we spoke about how states have their own forces of their own running. Quality and availability of healthcare, therefore, this word is variable, depending on so many different factors. Wealth, gender, ethnicity, location, age especially. As I said before, Trump is very much, if you're old, then it's your time. Your time has come, so yeah, very much depending on where you are on the spectrum, then you will get better or worse healthcare. Okay. All right, religion time. Okay, we have about half an hour, so that's quite good. This unit examines not only the role that religion played in US history, but also the current emergence. When I talk about current, I'm talking about, obviously, the past few decades. The emergence of religious diversity. Okay? It covers religious history from the colonial period up until the present day. So, these are the contents that you could potentially be asked about on your exam. We have religious history, contemporary US religion. This is important, the situation or the link between the church and the state and politics. Never really. I'm just being, this is just confirming in the classroom that this has never been asked previously. You never know. Yes, we need to talk about this separation of church and state. Because even though, do you remember when we spoke about the Constitution and how, even though ideologically speaking, you can say one thing, then when you're actually in action and when you're doing something, it can be very different, okay? So we're going to look at officially what the laws say about the church and the state and religion and whether they need to be separate. And then in reality, what happens? You can imagine, but okay. We're also going to talk about religion and education. For example, in schools, is creationism taught? Is Darwin taught? We also know, do you remember we spoke about the Bible Belt? There are certain places in the US where certain subjects are taught in certain ways, as you can imagine. Okay, religious history. Let's talk first of all about the colonies. And we always start from the colonies as our starting point. Contemporary US religious life and practices derive from Native American beliefs, of course, they were the original, colonial history, as well as the ways of later immigrants. So we always talk about these three time periods, or these three influences. Native Americans, the colonialists, and the ways of later immigrants. Why? First of all, tell me about the colonialists. So what did they believe? What were their, I know there was some variation, but in general, what religious ideas did a lot of the colonial people have?
The same as Britain.
Exactly. So we're talking Protestant. A lot of you, I'm sure that you've already studied, well, of course we studied it together, British history. The Protestant. Where did the Protestant religion come from? And the difference between Catholicism and the Protestant idea?
Well, the king is the head of the religion.
Yeah. But what king created Protestantism?
Sure. No. Henry.
Yeah. We get. Yeah. I'm sure that those of you who are following also knew that one. Henry VIII. Okay, so what did Henry VIII want?
He wanted to divorce.
Exactly.
And the Papa, the Pope, didn't want to let him. So he changed the religion to divorce.
Literally. So Protestantism, essentially, the foundations of Protestantism is because Henry VIII wanted to divorce, right? However, along the years and since the founding of the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism, there are some changes in terms of the way that the religions are practiced. I don't know if you remember, we spoke about within Protestantism, Calvinist branches, the Puritans. I want you to remember the term, the Puritans, right? Because the Puritans were the vast majority of the initial people who came to settle in the initial colonies They were the Puritans because a lot of them, they were facing religious persecution in many different places where they came from, the Netherlands, the UK. So they wanted to have their own religion. They wanted to be Puritans. What did the Puritans believe? The Puritans believed that there should be a direct link between man and God. For them, they wanted, for example, churches to be like lame boxes. This is the church. You have like the cross, and you have some like boring seats.
Austero, no?
Austere, muy bien, austero, exactly. They wanted all of their religion to be based on purity, como limpio, de eso viene like puritano. They believed that the Catholics were obsessed with ornamentation, with, right, ¿qué no hace falta? They want it to be about man and God, okay? So the Puritan ideas, hugely influential on current religious beliefs in the US, but also all of these waves of later immigrants, especially what have we had recent waves of immigration? Muslim, Buddhist, we have such a variety. So we're going to talk about that build up to the current variety. The historical development is characterized by religious diversity, also some fundamentalism, like the program about the Duggars that I told you about, these people that believe women need to be at home and be baby machines, and conflicts between different faiths, especially we've spoken about, the Muslims and the Christians. This is something that's really interesting. Why? Because according to the Americans and according to the Constitution, everyone should have what? Freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of faith. You, as a member of American society, according to American law, should be free to practice whatever religion you feel comfortable with, as long as you're not being violent, etc. Okay? But some people believe that now the Muslim faith is not in line with these principles of religious freedom. So it's like a debate between hasta qué punto you can be free, free to practice your own religion. Conflicts between faiths. Also very important, this idea about the emphasis on the social aspect of religion, which we'll talk about later. Education. For example, in American schools, a lot of children, they have prayers before the start of the day. I pledge allegiance, I pledge allegiance to my God, to my America, So this is a social. Really? Did you go to a religious school? Yeah, of course. I used to teach at the Salesiano.
Yes, I did.
Pues en los, there's a school in Valencia called Salesianos, and they have pictures of saints and Jesus on the walls, etc. So that would be considered like a social aspect of religion, because it's being brought into schools, into social structures of society. And that's also a point of contention. There's the debate. Should it be social? Should it be private? Etc. Let's move on. This is just like an introduction. During the colonial age, colonists practiced different types of European Christianity. Especially, as I said, there were conflicts between the Quakers, the Baptists, etc. Just keep in mind the Puritans. Yeah, exactly. Different groups settled during the century, so we're talking initially, in addition to the already settled Anglicans in Virginia. Pilgrims in Plymouth, these are the Puritans, separated from the English church and settled there. And a second large group of Puritans arrived in Massachusetts. It's the Pilgrims, the Puritans, they were all very much like, we've come to America to practice our own faith and our own way of doing it. Neither group was religiously tolerant. They believed that God chose them, God chose them to thrive. It's like a destiny. It's our destiny to be the best and to be because God supports us. That's very much the idea. I like this. Hardworking means pleasing God. That's one of the Protestant ideas. It's like everything needs to be austere and you need to just focus on your direct link with God. And how do you prove your link to God and how much you love God? By work. This work ethic. When people talk about American culture and the work ethic, it comes from them. Puritans. Religious diversity was most obvious in the middle colonies You can imagine all of these are different branches, okay, of Protestantism. Some of them more extreme, some of them less extreme, etc. Protestant and Roman Catholics established themselves in Maryland with religious tolerance for all Christian workshops. So in Maryland, some Catholics, some Protestants. The first Catholics who arrived in America were missionaries, of course, from Spain, from Portugal, France. We have some here. They are Spanish worshippers that I found Catholic. A few European Jewish traders also settled in the English colonies. There was a ban of the Jewish, but they settled and they grew. I like this, look. The book to learn how to speak, read and write in Spanish Jewish language, in English and Yiddish. So you can see this is the Jewish faith slowly establishing itself. Now, ¿qué pasa en el siglo XVIII? Decline in immigration levels before it then went up again with the second wave. The people came for free land, adventure, but they maintained their homeland beliefs. Two events produced a religious revival. One, the Great Awakening, and the War of Independence. So just keep that in mind. I really want to focus on the school thing. I think that's important. In the 19th century, religious groups recovered while the population in the country expanded, so people began to practice their own faith. They weren't so worried about, obviously, if there's a war going on and if you're poor, then you have less. Actually, no, I'm talking rubbish. If there's a war going on, your faith is even stronger, isn't it? Because you're like, oh, God save us, God save us. But not so much institutionalized faith. You know, the idea of building up a church. You're not going to build up a church if it's going to be bombed. So it's kind of a different, it's more, of course, the individualized faith carried on and became even stronger. But during the 19th century, religious groups in terms of institutionalized religion also expand. Okay? All right. Religious groups usually had quarrels, of course, we know. That's the same within Spain as within anywhere, right? Of course, if you believe that you're right, then you believe that everyone else is wrong. Catholic newcomers suffered extreme opposition. The Puritans were the first ones to arrive, when, really, they were not the first ones to tell yellow snakes. Earlier. Churches became involved in education, okay, and created schools with religious identification. This is extremely important now. In the 20th century, a large number of immigrants arrived, bringing Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, Buddhism, etc. Nowadays, the three major faiths are Protestantism, Catholicism, and Judaism. Yeah, the Jewish. However, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about how there's been an expansion, especially in recent years, of, number one, atheism, people who don't believe in any form of institutionalized religion. Spiritualism. Spiritualism is very important because what it means is that people have lost faith in, as I said before, institutionalized religion. People don't necessarily believe in Rome. Imagine people who were initially they come from a line of the Catholics. They say, I still have faith and I still believe in God or some form of God. I've heard this a lot.
But I don't know what is it.
Yeah, exactly. What I don't believe in is that the fact that there are people such as vicars or such as who have the power to tell me how I should believe in my God, right? So there's this kind of growing idea of I feel that I'm spiritual, but I don't believe in going to church on Sunday. Okay, so that's definitely one of the forms of, or one of the most recent developments. US religion underwent changes after the post-war revival. Increasing, this is important, the word pluralism. Increasing pluralism led to new religious groups such as fundamentalists, Scientology. Is Scientology a sect?
Yes, Tom Cruise,
Will Smith. Yeah, all of these kind of ideas about just that completely divert from the norm, or what we would consider up until that point traditional religion. Especially in recent years, we have pluralism. We're going to talk about people who believe in UFOs and that. Riches, exactly. So the US people nowadays usually say that they belong or have preference to some religion instead of being active members. Sí, pertenezco a la iglesia whatever, or creo in whatever, but I'm not necessarily an active member. This is insane.
In Britain. In Britain, the sentence was they refuse to go to the church, but they live their religion in a more private way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, amazing. Oh my God, your memory. So, in case those of you that are following online didn't hear, we're talking about how in the British side of the theory, we were saying about how people prefer to live their religion often in a more private way. So that's the same idea. I'm not necessarily an active public member of the church. I reject organized religion. This is very common. I reject organized religion, but I don't consider myself completely atheist or closed off to religion or spirituality. I consider myself spiritual, but not religious. So these sorts of phrases are more and more common. I like these pictures. I think that they kind of sum up this idea of meditation, finding your own link with spirituality. There are lots of religions that are based on nature. You know, like getting back to nature, and that's your way to find God or whatever you want to call God. Yeah. Religion is a very important thing in a high percentage of American people, despite the fact that some rarely attend religious services. What does this mean? They don't consider, we can't talk about a majority atheist society. What we can talk about is a tendency towards going away from institutionalized religion. That sums it up, okay? Why? I want to show you. Well, this is just a summary of what's the most common. This is interesting. Look, how old is your church? Catholicism, the Lutherans, the Anglicans, Baptists, Methodists, Mormons. The Mormons are very interesting. One of my friends had Mormon neighbors. So many children. Protestantism is the largest and most diverse of the US faiths because it has so many different branches. Each church depends on itself financially, has its own ministers, buildings, follows its own practices, divided into Presbyterian, Lutheran, all of these different branches, and each one has a different way of doing things. This is interesting. So we're talking about Protestantism can be divided into mainstream, fundamentalist. Have you heard of funding? You can all of funding. It's like the people who are super, super extreme in their beliefs. Fundamentalists and evangelists. So that would be the three main branches. The Roman Catholic Church is the second largest. Catholicism was historically confined. The Irish. Of course, the Irish were historically Catholic as well. Polish, Italian, German. Nowadays, many Latinos, Asians are also Catholic. The Jewish community religious practices range from Orthodox, that's kind of like mainstream, to moderate liberal reforms, etc. Here we go. There's also a mix of Buddhist, Islam, Sikhism, and a high group of people and a growing group who are atheists, agnostic, or people who don't consider themselves to have any religion. So let's get into politics. Church and state in the US are clave, so supposedly separate, okay? So exactly. Officially, there is a separation. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights, you remember the Bill of Rights straight after the Constitution, 1791, states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of religion. So this means that regardless of the religion that you want to practice, you can't be prohibited. Okay? This forbids state-supported church and promotion of religion. It also protects individuals' right to practice their own faith, their own individual, like you said, private faith. However, also very important, this Bill of Rights, this Constitution, these laws apply to government, not to state-level laws. So states can also make their own decisions. So look, Kennedy, he said, I believe in an America where the separation of church and faith is absolute. Eso lo decía Kennedy. Hay otros que dicen, religion, or the lack of it, is a private matter. American people believe in the intention of the founders of making a country with religious freedom. However, that's what I said. Some people believe that Islam is incompatible with the US national standards. So this is, as we know, a big debate. There are different opinions in the promotion of religion in the government or schools. Should schools teach whatever religion? Some people think that the promotion of a specific religion would negatively affect people who don't belong to that worship group. It's like if you teach creation in school, but then some of the children come from backgrounds that don't believe in creationism or whatever worship group we're talking about, then some people say that's not fair because those children are going to be obviously marginalized because they don't agree with what's being taught. Traditionally, there were official state churches. The churches had their own states, but eventually all churches were separate from the state. Nowadays, churches are not supposed to receive any direct state or federal support. So what do they rely on? They rely on self-supporting. They rely on member donations. So they rely. I don't know if you've seen these boxes that they pass around at the end of like put the money in the box. So supposedly churches rely on the support. Yeah. When I first moved to Spain, I was about, how old was I? I don't know. I was teaching clases at about 15, 16. And I was teaching this family. And I arrived at the house and they had this huge Virgin Mary sculpture. And I was like, wow, beautiful, like where did it come from? And there, because they belonged to this church in the pueblo, apparently they would pass it around month by month. Like each member would pay and then they would have the sculpture in their house. So it's like, so it's kind of like an incentive, I guess, and it makes you proud as in I contribute to that. So lo mismo, member donation. You know Scientology, they say that Tom Cruise has paid millions and millions. Oh my goodness, to support it. Because then he believes, I hope you've not watched it yet. No, I only make it as long as he's not but yeah, although religion is a private matter, public and private lives are not inseparable. Even though you could say that there's no link, of course there's a link, because the way that you go about your daily life is intrinsically affected by your belief system, right? The way that you behave with others.
And your vote.
Your vote, brilliant. Religion is always present in political issues such as the death penalty, abortion, same-sex marriage, armed conflict. So we can't say that religious ideology is separate. A religious sensibility is reflected in national symbols and emblems such as the Pledge of Allegiance. It's in our song, Eminem, I pledge allegiance. It's at the beginning of his rap, I don't know. Anyway, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. So what does this mean? I pledge allegiance to my founders, like all of the states, because the flag represents the state, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That sums up everything that we've been talking about, religious ideology, but also other national identity. So, this Pledge of Allegiance is said in school. Children give this Pledge of Allegiance, and they're saying, obviously, if you come from an atheist family, you're talking about one nation under God. Okay? You're being forced to talk about one nation under God. Okay? Yeah. So, let's talk about schools. Religion and education. Administrative and financial organisation of public schools is generally carried out by local districts, local level, and school boards. These school boards composed, like in El AMPA, like as if you, composed of elected citizens. So you can imagine that if the school board is composed of a lot of people who are very like-minded, then they're going to make big decisions as to curriculum, as to the way that things are run. They influence school policy and often what is to be taught. Okay? So it's at this level that battles between fundamentalists and modernizers over the school curriculum have been fought. Huge. Education is supposed to be neutral, although it's supposed to be, Sálvame, supuestamente, and it's reflected in the Constitution. Any attempt against neutrality would be considered as an infringement of the established rules. Schools and courts have tried to balance separation with religious freedom. For example, ¿qué haces con religious holiday? Recently, there's been some controversy in Spain. Yeah, exactly. Oh, los niños, they shouldn't be making Christmas cards porque esos anti-Muslim children, pues no, happening everywhere. Look, after the colonial period, most public schools supported a historically dominant Protestant Christianity by means of school prayers, religious instruction, las monjas. The Pledge of Allegiance and school prayers have been central to education debate. Algunos dicen it shouldn't. It's not right. It's good because it instills. Have you heard of this? The Americans talk a lot about the fear of God. Tenerle miedo a Dios, but it's not in sentido negativo. It's not like miedo. But they say he's a God-fearing man. Ser un God-fearing man para los fundamentalists is like the best thing you can be. Yo me quiero casar con una God-fearing woman, you know, like una persona que le tenga miedo. The fear of Catholicism growth in the 19th century led some states to ban schools from obtaining public funding for religious purposes. This is interesting. So the fact that many Protestants didn't want Catholic schools to start bringing in and doing their own thing, they said, oh, okay, ya está bien, separamos. But that affected them as well, because that meant in ese proceso del siglo XIX, public schools began to be secular, right? Es decir, no quiero Catholic. However, in 2001, quite recent, I guess, the Supreme Court decided that if there were publicly funded schools, so not private schools, publicly funded schools, they must allow religious groups to use those facilities para extraescolares, non-schooling hours, o sea, fuera de horas escolares, they said, you can do what you want with your time, okay? So, I mean, you can have a debating club, you can have a football club, but you can have a Bible study group, you know? So this was in 2001, they said, okay, you can, publicly funded schools must allow religious groups to use their facilities para actividades religiosas, as long as it's outside of...
And to remove religious elements?
Yeah. Yeah, no, sí. I just didn't put it in, but yeah. This decision aimed at distinguishing between state recognition of religion by publication of officials. So it's like, okay, in official teaching hours, we're not going to be teaching about creation. However, outside of public hours, you can use publicly funded institutions to do what you want to do. Es como un término medio. But, some parents send their children to religious or alternative schools because they feel that public schools, because of the secularism, they feel that public schools are dangerous and that their children are being brainwashed the other way. So what has this caused? This has also caused a lot of children learning at home, you see? The secular public school, controversy over evolution, creationism, etc., and people not being happy with quality of secular schools, they have decided to teach their children at home because that means that they can completely control what's taught. Which is like the Duggars. The Duggars, esta familia de niños, they're always taught by the parents. Attitudes to religion. Historically, American attitudes. Come on, are we doing okay? Because for some reason it's cutting off, so I can't see my time. Ooh, okay, we're fine. Historically, American attitudes to religion and religious belief have been generally positive, although in recent years, some people have gone against institutionalized religion, as we said. In 2010, a poll showed that 80% of the population, so 80%, religion was personally significant, regardless of whether they were members or not of an official church. Okay? However, in the same poll, many people admitted that they feel that religion is losing its influence in America. It's becoming It's argued that Americans were more religious in the 1940s and 50s. However, as we said, they still seem to be as individually religious, whatever you want to understand religion as. Quite subjective. But they say that individual religion is the same as in the 70s and 80s. Okay. Why? Significant changes in religiosity have occurred in recent years, especially. because there has been a lot of controversy about, for example, who leave unborn children alone, and we've got the vicar with his child, we know what he's doing. All of these kinds of scandals, this has affected the way that people view institutionalized religion. And I'm not talking necessarily about Catholicism, Protestantism. In general, there have been, of course, scandals on all sides. However, according to polls, it seems that Protestants show more confidence than Catholics in the way that their churches run. The very personal beliefs of Americans include expressions of traditional faith, such as God, miracles, heaven. However, they believe in God, miracles, and heaven outside of church. So you can still believe in God, but it's your own form of God. A sense of spirituality outside, organised religion, and some support towards what they call alternative belief systems. A large minority, so as in like minority, of adults accept ghosts, UFOs, astrology, witches, reincarnation. YouTube, if you go on, you look up conspiracy theories UFOs, so many videos about people believing in this. Some people believe in creationism, others believe, okay, so we can break it into three groups. Some people believe in creationism. They believe that you need to read the Bible as a literal piece of text. Others believe in what's called God-guided evolution. God created the world, but we do admit to the idea that exactly. Other people believe in evolution with no guidance of Jesus. Yeah, thank you. Also, some people believe in Darwinism, others don't. So, we've done it. We've reached the end, guys. That was the summary. I mean, like I know, obviously, it's been a little bit rushed. I hope that you've got an idea of the most important stuff. I've got a little message for all of you. Good luck on your exam. All this hard work will pay off. I'm so proud of you. I found it, and I'm serious. I am so proud of every single one of you. The amount of work that you have put into this subject. It's intense. I mean, it's dense. It's a lot of theory. But I hope that you feel that you've learned, and I hope that you've enjoyed as much as possible what we've been studying. I've definitely really enjoyed teaching the subject. You know, like. I think especially the textual analysis, I really enjoyed it, the commentaries and everything. I don't want you to feel super stressed about the exam. I know that everyone is really nervous. Keep in mind that when the equivalent is not looking for huge, massive, even though every time I've done diapositives, no, just do your summaries, think about the most important aspects of each topic, and just keep in mind that as long as you're reflecting and understanding and having studied, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Like, seriously, I have no doubt. And the commentaries, I was very, very happy with both texts in general. Everyone worked really hard on those. So I like the fact that all of you have shared your examples on the forum. Have a look at the examples of each. Be as prepared as possible and stay positive. And it's been a pleasure, guys. I will see you, not next week. Next week I'm going to be just watching exam. Next week, yeah, exactly. The following week, as I say, I'll be here for like a review and we can just focus on topics that didn't appear the previous week. And that will be the last one. Okay, so thank you so much, guys. I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you. Have a good weekend. You too, Ivan. Good luck. Mucho ánimo. All right, I will see you guys. Not next week, week after. Cualquier cosa, photos, anything. You know where to find me. Bye. Okay.